What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with Jarvis of the Almighty Night Demon. It is great to be able to talk with you, man. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you again, too. It feels like only yesterday we were doing the Sirith Ungol interview during the lockdown. I can't believe that was like 3 years ago at this time already.
That's pretty cool to have that in the rear view, huh?
I
That's something that we never thought would end, right?
right. I'm very glad to have that in the rear view. We made it. We made it this far.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it is so awesome to have you here. The new Night Demon album, Outsider, is absolutely kick-ass. Was the intention of this just to make a continuation off of Darkness Remains, or being that, you put out the Year of the Demon compilation and the Live Darkness album, this is more or less kind of like a new beginning for Night Demon in a way?
Yeah, technically it's our third studio album. So a lot of people look at just kind of studio albums as benchmarks of the band, and so they're like, "Why haven't you released an album in 6 years?" Well, like you mentioned, we released the triple live album in that time. We did 3 world tours. We released 5 singles in 2020, and then compiled them in 2022 for an album called Year of the Demon, which is 10 tracks. So we've done some stuff since then. Outsider is in it's definitely it's not a continuation of anything except for a progression of the band. It's a concept album, and it's like uh, it definitely stands on its own, and it's kind of like the next chapter for the band.
You mentioned that this is a concept album. Was it a preconceived vision to make this a concept record, or did this idea of the meaning sort of come as, you started writing more and more songs together and like it came more through fruition?
A little of both, but the idea for a concept album was there very early on. Our first 2 studio albums, Curse of the Damned and Darkness Remains, also started out as concept albums, but veered off the course. On Curse of the Damned, there's 2 songs that follow the concept. On Darkness Remains, tracks 1, 5, and 10 are a trilogy, like a story. We've always wanted to do it, but it's very hard to do, man. Like to make it cohesive from start to finish and have an interesting enough storyline, with also without getting too literal, because you're mixing different forms of when you're mixing different mediums. Like there's a big difference between a screenplay and a novel and a painting and a song. So it's like you don't want to have a boring concept record where it's like you're very literal about what happens. It's just boring. It's like it's not like reading a book. You want it to be a good sounding song. So we kind of took a lot of metaphorical approaches lyrically with the songs, so that you can jump in the middle of the album and not feel lost. But if you get the album physically, the storyline is in there, so you can kind of go, "Oh, okay, I see what's going on."
So a listener could almost like approach this because, like as a concept album fanatic, you might have made a terrible mistake telling me this is a concept album, because I'm gonna
Ah.
go real down the rabbit hole with this. But as a diehard concept album fan, whether it be Mastodon's Crack the Sky or Fear Factory's Steam Manufacture, or Nevermore's Streaming Neon Black, there's always such a profound impact that a concept album has. Is this concept rooted in more of your personal life and your more personal experience, or was this concept more of an external source of inspiration?
Yeah, it's very external. It's a fictitious story written from the ground up. I actually wrote a screenplay for it first, and then adapted it to the into an album. So yeah, no, it's nothing personal at all. Although I do think that this is the 4th script that I've written, and it's every time you're writing, you do always there's always a personal element brought into it. And that's what makes good writing, because it's just you have to go by some kind of lived experience in order to connect authentically with your characters, right? So but it's not anything personal story wise. But you know to to be honest about it, like, this record was finished a little while ago, and I went and listened. I hadn't listened to it for a while, and I went back and re-listened to it about 6 weeks ago, and I completely forgot about the storyline, and like the lyrics spoke to me about something that was happening in my life at that time, that I was like, it was crazy. I was like, wow, it's like this record was written about this whole other situation, So I think it can connect to anybody who listens to it.
Yeah,
It's very relatable
yeah.
lyrically.
It's unsettling on how so many concept albums could really almost serve as like premonitions in a way to what would later come. Kind of going back to that metaphorical thing, it almost seems like a lot of concepts are metaphors for the past, present, and future in a way too.
It's really weird how that happens, especially um, you talk a lot about novels that were written before that, like Fahrenheit 451 or 1984 or stuff where you're like, wow, man, we are really living in the, or watch an old episode of the Jetsons and you're like, oh man, besides the flying cars, like we're pretty much there. Um, but yeah, with music, it's always cool because there's so many interpretations, like, and the interpretation is really up to the listener. So I think it's a success in that way because I've experienced it myself, and I'm the guy who wrote the damn story. So if it can connect with me and relate to me about completely other topics, then I think we did a good job on that. Yeah.
Why do you feel that maybe this concept in the style of music that Night Demon is? Because Night Demon is, to me, one of the definition of a modern day metal band. You guys are a straight metal band. Why do you feel that maybe the sound of Night Demon is the best way to express this concept, opposed to some of the other styles you experimented with, whether it will be in Sirith Ungol or No Motive?
Yeah. um, I think it's because there's just three guys in the band, to be honest. Like, anytime you have less, I mean, more minds are I'd say more minds than one is always better, but too many cooks in the kitchen is bad. And anytime you can bring it into a smaller group, the ideas that you bounce off of each other become a lot more productive, and you're able to focus more on it. So to keep a cohesive album like this, the album's meant to be played as one piece. It's broken up into 8 tracks, but we recorded it live, and we can. It's right under 35 minutes, but we could play it straight without ever having any breaks of silence at all. I mean, that's how the album runs. So
Which I think is awesome. And you have to start off with Prelude and end with The Last Day. To me, like you said, the listener can approach it with many different angles, especially since you released Outsider as like the first single, which I think is cool. Like, but to me, I think it's one of those albums that are meant to be listened to chronologically. But then when you bring into a Night Demon live show, people are going to want to hear stuff off of Curse of the Damned and Darkness Remains, etc. So when you kind of shuffle around your set list a little bit, do you think that's going to maybe bring another type of context or another type of meaning when you're bringing in different songs from different eras of the band?
I think that when you talk about a headlining set for the band, again, this album is under 35 minutes. So, I mean, we can easily play this and play 10 more classics, and, because our songs are short. So, like, for a metal band, especially, we have some of the shortest songs. So, I, for headlining stuff, we plan on playing this album in its entirety from front to back, but you could do that even in the middle of the set and change up the vibe and open and close with classics. So it's more of like just a full performance, a Night Demon concert now, because there's just these ebbs and flows, and you could take the concert goer on these different journeys and end up back at the same place almost.
Do you think, because you mentioned you wrote a screenplay for this as well, do you think that you could
Mm-hmm.
express your storytelling through other mediums, whether it be a graphic novel or through film or other forms of literature, etc.?
Absolutely. My number one goal outside of music is to make a film. And I've got some other scripts that I've worked on, and hopefully this can come into play one day with this story. But that's my number one goal. I'm like obsessed with filmmaking and screenwriting, and it's like one of my biggest passions outside of music. And as far as a graphic novel, I've toyed with the idea of this too, because I've also done a lot of my own storyboarding. So like the idea, it's the blueprint's already there. I can't draw for shit, but you can give that to somebody and have them do that. But I don't know. I can't. Oh, you
Yeah,
really?
in case you need
Oh,
an artist.
I did not know. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you feel like? I mean, I kind of grew up a comic book kid, but like, I kind of feel like the medium's a bit lost these days. I mean, I feel like it's very popular in certain circles, but um, I think that I've seen a lot of graphic novels come out lately, especially surrounding bands, and I feel like people are just taking the songs and interpreting them into something and making stories around them. I kind of work in the reverse order. Like, here's the story of the song, here's the story of this album, and this should be brought out, instead of just going, oh, we wrote a story about Anthrax's Among the Living or Dio's Holy Diver, and now it's a graphic novel. And it's like, okay, but I
Yeah,
mean, I
metalhead
don't know.
artists collaborating with us is like collaborating with Gandalf the Wizard sometimes. It's hard to,
Right.
get the point across. But you mentioned that the comic book art, I think it's actually very popular within the music scene. Kind of an apples and oranges genre, but like you look at My Chemical Romance and how they're very involved with comics, or Coheed and Cambria and how they're very involved with comics as well. I feel like if you were to make a Night Demon comic series, I think people would very much appreciate that, especially with what Guar did with their graphic novel series as well. I think there is room for
There's
that.
incredible, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's
Yeah,
plenty of
and
room.
that lends itself more to their kind of band they are too, image wise. I mean, look, I'm not opposed to it, but I feel like it may be a bit of a cop out to not making a film, which is very difficult. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll talk off air here, but yeah, that's the thing too. We haven't had anybody approach us about it, and for us to go and commission somebody to do that, I mean, that's a lot of work, man. That's a lot of illustration. That's a lot of layout. That's like, and then going to print with something. I mean, it would have to be something you know, at this point, I think we would have to be approached with the idea versus us kind of trying to spearhead it, because it's such a big undertaking,
Of course. Of course. When it
Yeah.
comes though to working with music and all these different mediums, is there at all a similar mind frame creatively with it? Is it a similar form of self-expression, or does the creative process or the creative energy change depending on the medium you're working with?
I think it changes, especially with when you're writing. You're alone, man. You're on an island alone. You can give it to somebody for critique, which is always good. But when you're writing stories, you're not in a band. Like you're writing them on your own, and you're your own worst critic, and you have to solve a lot of problems on your own. And a lot of times when you're writing stories, you kind of know how they should start and end. But once you start getting into the middle of it, and if you have good enough characters, they kind of start telling you where this needs to go, which is part of a good flow state to be in, when your characters really tell you what happens next. However, a lot of times I find myself getting really attached to outcomes and the things that happen that I need to happen in the end. And by the time those things happen, now the story doesn't make any sense, and there's a lot of holes in it. And you got to be willing to throw stuff on the cutting room floor that you were once attached to. That things evolve. You know, it's I guess the same goes for songwriting, but you always have other people to bounce those ideas off of that are also making that work with you. So I do think there is a difference.
Of course. Of course. The characters that are portrayed within your story, do you feel that like when you're singing these lyrics and you're playing these songs and live and for the audience to experience, do you portray these characters in a way? Do you feel like you are almost in a way becoming one of these characters, or do you almost serve as kind of like the narrator in a way towards the story?
Um, I feel more as a narrator, because some of the songs are written from third person and some are from first person. So it depends on what the song is, to be honest. But again, look, like I said, I found other meanings in these songs, so I don't know what's going to happen. We haven't played any of them live yet, and when we do next month, we'll see. I think I'll just be more concentrated on remembering how to play them.
That should be the first priority. Not to undermine the concept or
Yeah,
anything, but maybe get the songs right, and then
yeah,
we'll get
right.
engaged. Now, I kind of wanted to go back to the past a little bit, because 2022 last year marked 10 years since the world really first heard of Night Demon with the self-titled EP. So kind of going down memory lane a little bit, what was the sort of mindset with that EP, making of that, and how did it sort of change with the making of Curse of the Dam? Were you very much conceptually as invested in it as well, or was that EP meant sort of like rolling the dice and sort of like getting your feet wet with the formation of the band?
It was like less than rolling the dice. There wasn't even any dice. Like it was we grew up in the punk scene of Southern California, and we had no idea about this underground metal subculture that was happening in Europe with classic heavy metal. And we loved the new wave of British heavy metal. So our goal was to make a 4-song EP and to put out a 7-inch and, record it analog, um, make it old school, even have like old school offset printing, everything to make it look like it was a band from like 1982 or something. And that was our goal, was to just put that out, and maybe somebody would stumble upon it and we would fool them that we were a band from back then. Um, we we rehearsed 5 times, I remember, once a week. So the first 4 rehearsals, we wrote a song. The 5th rehearsal, we recorded that EP. We were, yeah, and then we broke up. Our goal was like, that's it. We've done what we needed to do. So that was in 2011. So it wasn't until the very end of 2012, actually 2013, I kind of mark as really like the 10-year anniversary of that release. Because it came out digitally at the very end of 2012. And just to kind of get some feelers out there, there was a guy from New Wave of British Heavy Metal.com who contacted us because we had sent him, well, he replied to us because we had sent him the EP and said, hey, it's an old band from the early 80s from England, called Night Demon. You should check it out. They're not on your website. And he was like, bullshit. I know all bands. And I go, no, you probably hadn't heard of these guys that just made a 4-song EP. They never really left the garage or played a gig. And he's like, nah, bullshit. I know all bands. And we're like, no, seriously. So he took our word for it. He's like, well, this is fucking great. And I need to get a hold of these guys somehow. Do you know about their whereabouts these days? And so I said no. And he's like, well, can I share this on my website? So I said, yeah. So he started getting a lot of feedback immediately. And so then I kind of came clean and said, yeah, well, I did lie. You were right. And it is us. And, but from there, he spread the word. We started getting label offers and festival offers. And at that point we said, wow, we could really live our childhood dream here. So let's do it. And I've never looked back. I've never worked a day job since. Not because I'm rich, but because we were homeless for 5 years and we put everything into the band, and so that's been my life's work that started when I was 30 years old. It's kind of funny.
That's really an interesting story. It almost seems like Night Demon, like when we got Curse of the Damned and Darkness Remains, it almost seems like those were like they came by accident in a way. Like it almost seemed like it literally, you guys are a prime example of just the right place at the right time, or the right person discovering you at the right time.
I guess. I mean, I was in 36 bands before Night Demon. Mm-hmm. I mean, by the time that we started the band, all of our friends at our age were stopping. They were quitting music. They were getting real jobs. They were starting families, and we kind of just said, well, there's 2 ways we can go. We can, and it's not, and neither one of those ways was stay on the path that we're on. It was like completely change and get. And so, you take the red pill or the blue pill, right? And it was like, but for us, it wasn't keep playing music. It was like really give ourselves to the music, which I don't think we ever really did in any bands that we were in prior to this. Even though when you're young, you could say you were doing that. You were giving it all. But there were other things on our mind too,
Of course.
Chicks and drugs and so
extracurriculars.
We were taking all of that with the lifestyle versus like, hey, we really need to make this work. Like, this really needs to be a do or die thing. We can't live with our parents forever,
Of course.
So
of course.
Yeah.
And I have 2 more questions for you. One of them is kind of with the collaborative efforts of Night Demon, especially being a 3-piece. Is it really better if everybody in the band is always agreeing on everything at the same time? Or could maybe a disagreement here or there, or maybe like, different opinions, or maybe just being in the different headspace actually add like contrast to the music in a way and bring in different ideas?
As long as the person disagreeing is bringing in an idea, then it works. Okay. Like, I would never disagree on something if I didn't have a counterpoint, but it being 3 works because it's always going to be 2 on 1. If there's disagreement, right? It can never work the other way around, you know?
Yeah.
And if it's one on one on one, if it's one on one on one, then that means everybody, there's three ideas there that, you know, all that we ask in the band is to be open-minded enough to just try things. Let's just try it out, try somebody's idea. And if it works, cool. If it doesn't, you know, we learn not to take things personal. I never do, you know, with the writing. Yeah.
No matter how personal the art can be, you can't take anybody's interpretation of it personally. I'd imagine too.
You can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
You're gonna.
You're right.
Oh no, because I was gonna ask if maybe like a listener's interpretation of the music, if like whether they completely see it from your point of view, the music, or they interpret it in their own way. Do you think that could add another layer of context to the meaning of the album?
I don't know if that'll ever happen. If anybody will ever see it the way you it, I really don't. I've done the interview rounds on this album, and I've noticed that a lot of journalists that have been following the band for the last decade, like there's so many differing opinions on what their favorite 19 records are, and I think that's cool that they all. I'm totally open to that, and I'm not going to come out here and say that this is the best record we've ever done. You know, like I don't think that's even up to me. You know, but we were inspired, and it's the most we've stretched ourselves, and it's different, and that's good, and that's all we're here to do. We're not here to repeat ourselves. So I think this will be a favorite among a lot of people, potentially people that have never heard us before, but I think upon discovering the back catalog, they'll be pleasantly surprised on what we've already brought to the table. So yeah, I can't look. I'm just not attached to results anymore. I can't be. I have been in the past, and I've been crushed. You know.
Well,
yeah, and you know, I never looked at it from an outside point of view. You know, the whole like, look at what you do have and be grateful for that, because it's like, man, there's so many things for this band to be grateful for, but that like not hitting the target all the time on results from something outside. It's a tough pill to swallow, and it's just not a healthy way to. There's not a healthy headspace to be in. You know?
Satisfaction is the death of desire, to quote Jamie Josta. And the final question I wanted to ask you is going off of the topic of Night Demon, but this year marks, it's either this year or next year, depending on who you ask. Maybe you could answer, but 20 years of the Lola EP by No Motive. Speaking of attachments, because Burnout 3 Takedown, the game that was featured on, it was the first song I heard on that game. That's how I discovered just about every single band that served as my gateway into loving heavy metal. My Chemical Romance, Jimmy Eat World, Rise Against, Atreyu, all those bands, and No Motive. So the Lola...
Those are all bands that we toured with. That's funny.
That's awesome. I really wish that they did like a festival on that one game alone. Motion City soundtrack, just everybody on that. But like,
well, that When We Were Young Fest in Vegas is similar.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping you guys would be on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what was the memory of the making of that EP and being featured on Burnout 3 Takedown? Kind of like a fanboy question I wanted to ask.
Well, so like the EP was basically, it featured a couple songs that was on that were on the album that was about to come out. So really what it is just, it was kind of a teaser or a way to hold fans over and gain some interest and maybe some radio interest for the album that was about to come out. So for the third full-length No Motive album, but yeah, like there's two of the songs on there. One of the song you're talking about, Independence Day, that was on Burnout 3, is actually the same recording and just a different mix from the full-length album. So it's a very interesting that you got into that EP from that. So I guess it kind of did its job, you know. But really, it was just a promotional tool. That's all that EP was, you know.
Dude, that was, again, whether you realize it or not, that song, I was 10 years old when I first heard that. That was my gateway into heavy metal, for a big gateway into it. Can't give all the credit, but a massive gateway into it. So I just needed to ask about
I mean, that's great. I remember them sending us copies of the games, and they sent me a PlayStation 2, I think, and an Xbox, and like, those were the days, man, you know.
Dude.
Like, and I was just I loved playing that game. It was great, you know.
one of the most frustrating racing games ever. I developed a psychological complex from that game where every time I see a speeding car ahead of me, I get pissed off. So,
Or like, yeah, every time I get into a car accident, I always think I can control it in slow motion as I'm spinning through the air. But
I mean, maybe there's a possibility. I mean, only one way to find out, but best if you don't find
I
out
thought that
anytime
was the
soon.
coolest thing about that game, though. How you can kind of steer your wreck in slow motion.
Oh, that was the coolest part. And that radio station host too, Stryker, I think his name was, who
Yeah,
like
he was a K Rock DJ in LA forever. So I kind of grew up listening to him on the radio anyway. So
oh, that's had to have been awesome. So
yeah.
so before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time, for such an awesome conversation. Great to have you back on the show. Just with the release of Outsider, is there just anything else you would like to promote for Night Demon in terms of tours, or what else we could be expecting for the near future?
Yeah, we've got a full U.S. tour coming up. Starts on March 16th and goes to April 13th. We're doing like 25 shows across the states. We're making the most out of this year, and we're doing another world tour. So there we go.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Night Demon. Be sure to check out Outsider, coming out via Century Media very soon. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.